Forza Horizon 4 is 7 years old. Yeah. Did I scare you with that? Good. And apparently that puts it in the required range for people to feel nostalgic about it, or at least to start feeling nostalgic about it. Because here are some of the Instagram reels that I kept seeing over the last couple of weeks. Dad, how good was Lockdown Forza Horizon 4 with the boys? And it basically just plays like an edit of the intro. I obviously cannot play the music because it's copyrighted, but yeah, nostalgia hurts. And then you also have the same thing echoed in the comments. Forza 4 was my first Forza, absolutely magical experience, and don't get me started with the Lego Land DLC. Oh my god, it was so good. Here's another reel, basically glamorizing the cover car of the McLaren Senna, which I think is pretty interesting. I'm gonna talk more about the cover car as well later, but it seems to be like a big factor for how beloved this game actually was. Man, hands down, Forza Horizon 4 will be the best game to ever come out in the series, because for me, it's nostalgic, yet still running, an emotion, and I can't forget the song that plays at the start of the game. Man, it's just so full of memories. 1 to 3 and 5 were fun, but 4 just had the vibes. Honestly, I think every Horizon game has its own distinct vibe, so to say. Maybe 5 a little bit less than the others, but yeah, definitely like 1 to 4 I think had like their own kind of style, I'd say. It's just a stupid racing game. The game. And proceeds to show a bunch of scenery, which I find pretty interesting, because I remember initially being kind of like turned off when it comes to the location when it was announced that Horizon 4 is going to be in the UK. But it turns out a lot of people actually seem to really love it. Honestly, myself included, if I'm being honest. It's so big! POV, it's 2018, you turn on your Xbox and see that amazing intro. Okay, I'm guessing not the Playground Games logo intro, because this is always way too loud. This is always like way too loud. But what they're referring to is obviously the title screen, which I gotta be honest, I think it's probably like the most creative one out of the entire series, with the camera just kind of like rotating around the car and the seasons changing dynamically. I always thought this looked really cool, honestly. Physically in 2024, but mentally in 2020, grinding the Forza Horizon 4 Goliath race. Also seems to be a bit of a core memory. I mean, I think everyone who's played the Horizon games for a while probably at some point did grind one of the Goliath races. For me, it was the one in Horizon 3, which I gotta be honest, was kind of lame, especially because I think the start-finish line was actually on the beach. So it was kind of annoying when you brought like one of the super fast cars optimized for road, because most of the map, most of the race was on road, and then you just have this like weird off-road bit at the end. But it seems to be kind of like a canon event, I think, for Horizon players. So I think all of that goes to show that at the moment, there seems to be a lot of nostalgia for Forza Horizon 4 and pretty much everything surrounding it. The music, the map, the cover car, the cars in general, the vibes. And I find this really interesting. Because as far as I can tell, this is the first instance of late 2010s nostalgia. I did notice that there are people that already start to feel a little bit nostalgic towards the mid 2010s, especially when it comes to YouTube, because I think back then YouTube was just like at a really interesting point, and most big YouTubers really just did insanely like unhinged stuff just because they wanted to. But I couldn't come up with anything else from the late 2010s, so from like, let's say 2017 to 2020, that really gets people nostalgic. Horizon 4 seems to be like the only thing in that ballpark at the moment. But that obviously begs the question, why? Like, what is it with Horizon 4 that gets people feeling so nostalgic? And I think it's definitely down to like a bunch of things, some of which I've already mentioned earlier. But I think at the top of that list has to be the music, and it's like the one thing that all of these reels have in common, which I unfortunately wasn't able to show, but they all use the same song, which is the title screen song from Odessa. And I gotta be honest, it's definitely one of my favorite ones as well. I would probably put it at number 2 or 3 of like title screen musics from the Horizon games. But it's something about that song in particular that, I don't know, it just feels more, it has like a somber note. It's hard to really explain, And you really should like listen to the song again to like really understand what I mean with that. But there's just something about the song that just hits the feels in a certain kind of way. Like it almost feels like the song was made to feel nostalgic in a couple years, is the best way I can explain it. But honestly, all the music from Horizon 4 was actually super good. Like, I was always a big fan of that game's soundtrack. I remember back then when the demo came out, I played it shortly before I went to a flight, or on a flight to the UK, funnily enough. And I was playing the game for like a day or two. And then while I was in the UK and on the plane, I would listen to some of the songs that I liked from the game, like from the in-game radio. So yeah, you can easily see why people feel nostalgic towards the game, and it's definitely in large part because of the music. But another reason that we've seen, and I think this is even more interesting, is the cover car. It seems to be also at the center of a lot of these like reels and videos. And this one I find very, very peculiar, I gotta be honest. Because at first I didn't really think too much of the car, like of the McLaren Senna, the cover car. But the more I think about it, the more sense it makes. It is kind of the most iconic and most fitting, and probably also the most unique cover car in the entire series. Now, I think all of the cover cars from the Horizon games are cool in some way, shape, or form. But let's compare this, for example, to the first or second game, which also have fitting cars. So you have the Dodge Viper for Horizon 1, which makes sense because the game is, takes place in the US. And the Lamborghini Huracan, which, is an Italian car and, placed in the Italian-French border area, kind of like. So both of these cars make sense, but at the end of the day, these are fairly basic, quote-unquote, supercars or sports cars. Like, they're not really unique. They don't really stand out, I guess, to the average person. But when you look at the McLaren Senna, like that is a really unique looking car. Like, there's not really, like, it's a car you wouldn't really see anywhere else, I think. Like, for example, the Huracan, which is the cover car for Horizon 2, it's like a fairly it's like the most basic Lamborghini out there. Like, it's like, like almost every rich guy drives one, it feels like. The Viper is definitely a little bit more interesting, I would say, but it definitely doesn't have this, like, extremely out there look to it that the Senna does. So I think in some way the Senna is so central to the nostalgia to Horizon 4 because it just feels so unique. It looks so different. It looks unlike anything else out there. It really feels like the car was kind of made for the game. And obviously it fits since, McLaren is a British brand and, takes place in the UK, the game. So it all matches up. But another thing that we were able to see is the map actually being like a big point as well. It was like one of the focal points for one of the videos that we've seen. And this actually does surprise me because I remember back when Horizon 4 got announced at I think some kind of like E3 presentation or Xbox showcase, I was really turned off at first when I learned that the game takes place in the UK, because I've already been to the UK twice at that point, and it never really struck me as a super interesting location for a Horizon game, if I'm going to be honest. Like, I had other locations that I would have rather seen, honestly. So my hype was initially really low because I didn't really expect too much from the map and the location in general. However, in hindsight, I can definitely acknowledge that the map was actually pretty good. It didn't have all of the different biomes that Horizon 3 had, which I think made that map like almost a little bit more interesting. But it definitely had it had more verticality, I think was like the big thing. But obviously like the really big thing was the seasons and how the map completely changes with every week that, you play the game. It also had a few like really good spots like the beach, you had the main city, Edinburgh. Like it had very like memorable locations despite everything. So it's easy for me to see why people also feel a little bit nostalgic for the map itself, which once again, looking back to how I initially thought of the game and how I was kind of like turned off by the location and the potentially the map, is definitely a nice surprise. And I think like one final reason that really makes people feel so nostalgic for it is the multiplayer. It was probably the game where I think the multiplayer thrived the most in comparison to the previous game. I think Horizon 3's multiplayer was already pretty big. Horizon 1 and 2 was kind of like a little bit more, with Horizon 3 basically being a PC game, it brought in a lot more players. But I think with Horizon 4 being a Game Pass game, I think it was pretty much the first Forza Horizon game that was available on Game Pass, along with, both PC and Xbox. It just brought in a lot of players and it made a lot of people play in multiplayer with their friends. Now, the multiplayer wasn't super perfect, especially when the game initially came out. But I think over time, the multiplayer became a a big central part of like this game's life cycle, especially with its introduction of the seasonal playlists. So with all that out of the way, one obviously has to ask the question, was the game really even that good? And my answer to that question is, it doesn't actually matter. Obviously, it has to be good to a certain degree, otherwise you wouldn't have this many people feel so fondly about the game. The point that I want to make here is that it doesn't actually matter, because what actually contributed so much to the rise in nostalgia for this is that the game really came out at the right time. So this game came out, I want to say like roughly a year and a half before the COVID lockdown happened, if you still remember. And the game was still going very, very strong during that time. Like, it was still getting active updates, regular monthly seasonal playlists and cars, as well as also like bigger updates like the Super 7 update or the Eliminator. All of that stuff was still like fairly new and fresh, and the game kept, you know, getting like new updates, especially with the 2 expansions as well. And so I do think that, you know, during the COVID lockdown, a lot of people just picked up the game on a whim, because they just suddenly had a lot of time on their hands and they had nothing to do but do stuff at home. And so with that, I think people started to bond with the game in a really weird way, because it was just a really, really unique experience overall back then in 2020, when, you know, it felt like the world just was at a standstill and everyone was just kind of at home. And I think it led to people really bonding with the game in a really strange and weird way. Now, obviously, people are also nostalgic for other Forza Horizon games. In particular, I'm like really nostalgic for Horizon 1 and also to a lesser degree Horizon 3. But I think the wave of nostalgia is probably the biggest at the moment for Horizon 4. At least it feels that way for me. And I think it is definitely in large part because it just had way more players. Like, I think with Horizon 4, that is like the one game where the player count like really started to blow up. And then it obviously blew up way more with Horizon 5. But as I said earlier, with Horizon 4 being on Game Pass and everyone having a ton of free time during COVID, and the game also being available on PC and actually not even being that hard to run either, it just led to a lot of people playing a Horizon game for the first time. And I think Horizon 4 was many people's first Horizon game as well. So that is probably also a big reason why the wave of nostalgia feels so much bigger for Horizon 4 than any of the other games. Regardless, it's still pretty interesting for me to observe this, because as someone who has played all of the games since the start and pretty much played all of them at least like somewhat close to launch, I gotta be honest, like pretty much every single Horizon game before this one left a stronger impression on me. Like, I think Horizon 4 was the first game where I felt kind of whelmed at first. Like, I didn't dislike the game. I still like remember the game fondly even today. In fact, just last year I played through the entire game again on Steam to just get all of the achievements, so I can just experience everything all over again. And I really enjoyed my time with it for sure. But as I said, I think all the Horizon games, especially Horizon 1, just left a much stronger impression on me because they felt way more vibey, for lack of a better word. I think Horizon 4 was the first one where it started to feel a little bit more generic to me. Like, the game was really built to be as realistic as possible when it comes to like the graphics and the vibes and pretty much everything. Even down to the radio music itself just being like actual music you'd listen to on a radio instead of just being someone's like Spotify playlist, or like with Horizon 1 and 2, music that a DJ actually put together. However, like I said, it doesn't really matter what game left the strongest impression on me and which one feels more generic than the other ones. Because as I said earlier, Forza Horizon 4 is 7 years old, and that's a lot of time. And obviously a lot has changed and happened in those 7 years, not just for the world in general, but for people, for all of us basically. Like, try to think back where you were in life in like late 2018. So for me, I was just fresh out of my parents' home. Like, I just moved into an apartment for the first time. I just started university, which was like a completely new thing for me. Like, new location, new city, new people, new everything basically. And now, 7 years later, I have moved again. I'm in a different city again. I do YouTube full time, and studying just feels like, just generally being in university, to me feels like a distant memory already at this point. And I'd imagine it's probably a similar story for everyone else, especially if you consider that I think a lot of people that feel nostalgic towards this game are probably people that were born in the early to mid, maybe even late 2000s. And you gotta consider that people born in that time frame were still kids when Horizon 4 came out, right? Like they were probably still going to school, high school or middle school, and those same people are now adults themselves. So they went on to like study at college or whatever, or go to university, or maybe they went to do their first job. Maybe all those people also moved out of their parents' house. And I think those same people kind of like look back on Horizon 4 as kind of like the last thing they were able to experience as a kid, if that makes sense. It was kind of like the last time they were still in school and had a lot of free time and were able to just play regularly with their friends until, you know, these days everyone's life has probably changed a lot. So, and I think all of this should pretty well explain why people feel so nostalgic towards Horizon 4. And honestly, with all that taken into consideration with the game and, you know, people's experience with it, the timing of when it came out, honestly, in hindsight, it doesn't actually surprise me at all. If anything, I'm surprised people didn't feel this way sooner, if I'm being honest. The question now is obviously, will people also feel the same kind of nostalgia for Forza Horizon 5? And I probably would say not really. I do think that there's probably going to be some kind of like nostalgic feelings towards Horizon 5, undoubtedly, especially because even more people played that game, and Horizon 5 was also many people's first Horizon game in the series. But as I said earlier, I think Horizon 4 just hit a very certain zeitgeist. Like, it just came out at a very, very special and interesting time for a lot of people. Yeah, I don't think you can really replicate that. And I think with, you know, how different Horizon 5 is as well, I just don't think it's going to hit the same for a lot of people. But yeah, definitely quite surprising to see this regardless though, because I remember when Forza Horizon 4 came out, it actually had a pretty mixed reception, at least by like the hardcore fans in the series. Obviously casuals loved the game, but I remember like when this came out, there were a lot of like pretty blatant issues with it that I think since then have all been fixed. I think generally like Horizon 4 is a pretty decent, honestly really good game, I would even say. But the turnaround is definitely really surprising to me, and if I try to think back, I don't think back then when the game came out I would have ever expected to see people feel this. To see so many people feel like this towards the game, because when it came out it was just kind of like, yeah, you know, it's fine. But yeah, I'm really curious to see how people will feel, or if people will feel this way about other modern racing games that we see at the moment. So I think if there are like a handful of racing games that I would suspect will also like emit really nostalgic feelings in a couple of years, it's probably first the Crew Motorfest. Yes, I'm not kidding, because that game also seems to really prioritize vibes over everything. It just feels like it's this like really specific road trip type experience. I've been slowly playing the Crew Motorfest again over time as well, like recently. I can definitely see some people looking back fondly on that game in the near to far future. Another game I can definitely see this with, and we might actually see this very, very soon, or have already seen this in some capacity and I just missed it, is Need for Speed Heat. Now, the reason why I picked out Need for Speed Heat instead of any of the other ones, 2015 is like an obvious one. I think people have felt pretty nostalgic about Need for Speed 2015 for a good while now, so it just feels like a bit of a no-brainer. But with Payback just being kind of like a bit of a generic action movie flick, like kind of like Fast and Furious, and Need for Speed Unbound just being really, really divisive, I think it was Heat that was just kind of like the game that just brought it all together, had a really, really unique location, and some of the music in that game was also genuinely good, I gotta be honest. Another game I can definitely see people feeling nostalgic for soon, although this is probably gonna take a couple of years still, is the new Tokyo Extreme Racer. The Tokyo Extreme Racer reboot, I think, is also going to make people feel quite decently, especially given that there's always like a lot of nostalgia for pretty much all of the Genki games, like pretty much anything that they made, you know, got people feeling nostalgic, and I don't think the new TXR is going to be any exception, but I think that's still a good few years from now. And then one last one, but I'm not entirely sure on this. But it might genuinely be Gran Turismo 7. It's gonna be curious. I'm gonna be curious to see how this is gonna develop. But I do think Gran Turismo 7 will also feel, will make people feel somewhat nostalgic. But I'm kind of like on this because I don't think people feel this way about GT Sport. Interestingly enough, people feel this way about like older Gran Turismo games, but not Sport. So I'm not sure on this. We'll see, I guess. But yeah, that is it for today. How do you feel about Forza Horizon 4? Do you feel nostalgic about it? And if so, tell me about your favorite moments in the game. Was there anything that you remembered, that you did in the game that you remember particularly fondly? Let me know about it in the comments below. And with that, I'll hopefully see you next time. Take care, take it easy, and as always, Peace. See you guys.